All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome back to episode 7 of the Wireheads podcast. You might notice Diamond Dust is looking a little strange tonight, and that's because this isn't Diamond Dust. Diamond, as some of you, if you were here live with us, may have heard when we were playing through her game earlier, she has had some very busy weeks, some very relentlessly busy weeks. She needed the night to recover and rest and actually take 5, which fully understand. And so in her place tonight, we have my good friend Nyla, who is the newest member of Neon Inferno and actually quite recently new to Cyberpunk Red. So hello, Nyla. Thank you for joining tonight.
Hi, happy to be here. Oh my god. I feel like a celebrity.
Thank you. So the other thing here that we're gonna, just to introduce everyone to the topic we've got tonight. So we are, as is appropriate with my newest player in the game, we're gonna be talking about new player mistakes and experiences. And Nyla has promised me that he also has some topics for the second half of the episode. This week, like all weeks, will be no different. Half of this will still go up on Diamond's channel. We decided that probably would be best structurally to keep with the continuity of things. Of course, those of you who are watching this on Spotify or listening on Spotify, same unified experience you've always got. Nothing's changing there. So, all right. But yeah, so to kind of dive in, I guess, let's talk a little about new player mistakes. So I'm gonna kind of, I guess, start by qualifying what I mean when I say like new player mistakes or things like that. So new player mistakes I generally view as like, when you're new to a game, it's obvious that you're not going to know everything. You're not going to know every little secret. You're not going to know how to optimize. You're not going to have all that, juicy information that normally is there when you come back as a full-fledged, experienced player who knows all the little minute rules, knows all the secret stuff. Cyberpunk, I would argue, some of that would be things like maybe when you're new, you don't realize 8 reflex allows you to dodge bullets, or you aren't aware of kind of how overpowered certain cyberware and like weapon combos can be, or those sorts of things. So I guess, Nyla, because I know, and this is something where we're going to kind of cover a question early because it's from Diamond, and okay. Also Twitch, just to cover this as well for y'all. If you do have questions, please ask them in the chat. We will definitely be able to answer those at the end, just like always. I will put them in the document that I have access to here, and we will get that answered for you by the end of the show if we don't answer before our QA section. But Diamond had asked earlier, when we were all kind of in chat together ahead of this, when you made Peacock, who is Nyla's netrunner in Neon Inferno, knowing what you know now, is there anything you would have done differently? Are there any like obvious mistakes that you think you would have made where that's concerned?
It's a good question. And when Diamond asked that earlier, I was like, that is, because I was like thinking about it, and I kind of went into making the character with the kind of mindset of like, I'm gonna do the best I can with this, with what I know. And I mean, the nice thing about like starting with you as my DM was that you were able to help me through the process in a way that I felt like was very constructive, and helped me to avoid a lot of those mistakes. But from a gameplay perspective, I think I was too afraid to kind of chip away at my humanity. Because when I made my netrunner, you told me the 2 things I need was a neural link and interface plugs, and I was like, cool. Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna go beyond that because I was too scared to like take any of the more kind of niche cyberware that I feel like could have been really fun. Like teleoptics was one.
Sure.
That I would have really liked. Going into it. But I think that's definitely maybe not a mistake, but something I should be more cognizant of as I continue on with characters after Peacock.
Mm-hmm.
I think another one, maybe I will definitely do with future characters is maybe try to rely on life path a little less. I think life path is great for your first character, which Peacock was, so that's definitely something I don't regret, like I said, but it's definitely something that in the future I want to change. I want to...
If you don't mind me asking, before we kind of move past that, what would you consider, I guess, an over-reliance of life path in that context, I guess?
I think it's less of an over-reliance on life path, because I could go forward and make good characters with the life path. The thing I want to do with my future characters is to kind of take the knowledge I have of the world and to kind of apply it more directly, versus kind of letting the life path do it for me.
Okay. And that's, yeah. I could see that. I guess I will say I don't necessarily agree actually with that stance, because here's always been my thing about life path, and this is why I think life path is such a great tool, is it defines your character in a way that is like helpful to kind of drive narrative points forward, and it's a big toolbox. And I think if you role play closer to your life path, at least at the start, it does, I feel like, create a more organic kind of character out of the mess that so often, I guess, follows cyberpunk adventures and things like that, right? And it is a complex and very like uneven world, so I think that having that is a helpful tool. So I think like using the life path in the way that you did is honestly how I like using it. That is my favorite way to use it. Even now, like, I think I've made like 3 different characters now, technically. And very soon I'll probably make some more, because I know several of them are running the edge pretty heavy right now that I've got. So yeah, one day I may have to kind of shift those gears again, but I'll be doing that with like full knowledge of the life path.
Right. And I just want to say, like, I love the life path. I think the life path is great. I'm not saying that the life path is bad, but for me as like a person, as someone who enjoys making characters, I like that the life path kind of brought me into character creation in Cyberpunk without having to know a ton about the world.
Sure.
But now that I'm in the weeds is where I'd like to say, okay, I'm not going to roll for things as much. I'd like to kind of decide this on my own, or maybe go something that's off the beaten path of the tables.
Oh, I see. Okay. I mean, there's a lot of really good general stuff in the tables. So yeah, in other words, you're not going to rely on the random elements of the life path tables.
Yes.
You would pick off the life path. That makes a lot more sense. Okay.
Or
cultivate your own.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying that I wouldn't use the life path system. I would still, of course, fill that section out, but kind of go into it more of like, because when I made Peacock, I said, I'm going to roll and I'm going to see what I get and I'm going to make the best of it, Sure. And that was healthy because, it forced me to be creative with what I was essentially given by the dice. So it was a good experience for me. But in the future, I'd like to, make characters that I feel are a little more, something where it's like I have a vision for them before I even sit down and like write out their sheet.
No, and I think that is, I do a mix of the two, like, because when I sit down and make a character, because I agree, like your first character rando rolling is honestly really cool, unless you have like a really, like on one of the points of the life path, you have like this really strong opinion of like, this is what I want to do. You aren't probably going to like, you can rando roll and it'll make some degree of sense. And if it ever doesn't, you can just re-roll, right? You're not married to any of those random results. But the good news about, like once you get experience, there will still be some tables where you're like thinking of like, you're like, okay, I've got this vague concept of like, I've got this character in my mind. I want to bring them to the table. And I know like 3 of the points of the life path about them very strongly. And the rest I'm maybe not as sure about. So as you go through, maybe you'll start like, there will be other points other than those 3 that you're like, okay, like, yeah, now that I've been going through this, I kind of know like that's what they would be. But then there are other times where you're like, okay, I still need a rando roll because it's like, I don't have as solid an idea of who this person is, right? Like, I know who I am, but I don't know who they are. So I'm like, I want to understand that part of them better. So we throw a die to see what happens then. But yeah, I agree though. I think Life Path has a lot of really good flexibility in it for that level of kind of creativity. You're not stuck by anything with the Life Path, to say the least. Yeah.
And there's also like some factions in the world or some settings that I'd really like to explore more that maybe the life path doesn't, it can encapsulate it, sure, but it isn't specific on it, so there's some factions in Danger Gal dossier that I think you could totally incorporate into one of the life path table choices, but maybe you want to be a little more specific about it, like you are a I forget which one it is, but it's like something about like how you grew up. So like you're on the streets or something was one of them. And like maybe you're really interested in like Generation Red or something. So putting down in your life path on your sheet, just like my character ran with Generation Red, and then but they came from nomads. It's like, how do you that could be something way more interesting than anything the life path could give you, not because it's bad, but because it's general, right. There's just these settings, these factions you just want to explore, or force your GM to explore.
Yeah, I mean, and that's honestly from the GM side of meeting new players and kind of by extension then that new perspective, I can say that's probably one of the best parts of getting someone who's new to the setting and the system and the world, because they don't really know what's there, right? Not like I do. And I then have to leave a degree of my comfort zone because I'm like, here are the parts of the city and the factions that inhabit them that I know a lot about, right? But if a player comes in, they're like, oh yeah, I've read the books like you have, right? Like I know what I want to explore. I have a fascination with like this faction and this part of the city. And maybe those aren't things I've looked into in the past, not as deeply at least as the ones I do know well. And so it causes me then to have to, reach out of my comfort zone and grow a little bit as a GM to then bring those people and the places in that district or whatever in to fill those gaps in my own knowledge and make the world more immersive on a broader scale than I had before I knew those things. So I really like that shift in perspective that grants me as a GM, and like the expansion, I guess, of my experience when that occurs.
Right.
Yeah. I will say that like as a GM, new player experience is like a really, it can be a really, I guess, daunting thing, especially I know, I think it was yesterday or maybe the day before. Time is a concept. I'm just living in it. But like I sleep weird. So like I sleep half the morning away most days. So like,
sure.
But there was a comment on the first episode of Neon Inferno from someone who just found my channel through my GM guides and stuff. And they were saying that they were a new GM that had never played Cyberpunk before. And they were with a group of players that also had never played Cyberpunk before.
Amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Fresh all across that table. They're fresh as hell. And this person's just like, yeah, I'm a take the fall and be the first GM. And I'm like, that is, because that's me. Like I've talked about it before on, I think on this podcast, and definitely on my channel that like that is my history. So like for me, I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, if you're a new GM, that can probably, I would say, that's probably the most daunting aspect of
Yeah, man.
the new player experience is like, how do you provide a good new player kind of like element?
Yeah.
And I guess because you have GM'd a few times,
Yeah.
and kind of dove off the deep end yourself there a little bit.
Mhm.
Um,
Maybe.
yeah. What like what was that experience like for you, I guess, as like a new GM with very little experience in the system? Like how did you kind of navigate that?
No exaggeration, it was horrifying. If like, okay, I should say I've played. I'm very familiar with tabletops. So tabletop gaming is not a new concept to me. I'm very familiar, but like Pathfinder is my system,
Right.
and fantasy is my world, and I am not a few, not a. I'm not an expert on the futuristic. That's the word I was looking for.
Sure.
But I came into it, and it's kind of the same thing of like me coming into your games when I first started in your boot camp. Was I wanted to. This is like as a personal thing, and I feel like that I needed this as like for personal growth. Is
Sure.
I needed to get comfortable to being uncomfortable, you know.
Yep. That's
And it's like-
100% right in my experience too. So yeah, I hear that.
and so it's like I jumped into GMing figuring like, okay, this can go great by some miracle, right?
Mhm.
And it would have been a miracle, or this could go horribly, and I am expecting that, but that's okay because it'll be good experience,
Right.
you know. And that's hard to do, like for anyone. Even just like starting a new system is horrifying, but like
Mhm.
you know, but like you are going to grow from it. You are going to get better as a player, as a GM, as whatever, you know. If you, and that goes for really anything in life, but we're this isn't the anything in life podcast, so we'll
Yeah.
stick to Cyberpunk. You know, and so I jumped into GMing because I wanted to learn. I felt like learning to GM would make me better as a player.
Mm.
That was one thing I definitely went into it with. And I felt like if I could GM it, I could definitely play it.
Mhm.
And if I could play it, I could definitely GM it. You know, it goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
Everything's 6 inches from each other, sort of thing.
Well, and I think like to comment on that briefly, like Cyberpunk as a system is a very like it's a very symmetrical system in that way where like when you're playing as a player versus playing as a GM, like the only real added stuff the GM does is like the usual tabletop GM stuff, right? Prepping the session, prepping the levels, understanding how like encounter design works, but like when you're crunching numbers in the system and like running like math and things for skill checks and things, like none of that changes. Like there's no novel systems really for enemy characters that the players don't also use. So like when you learn one, yeah, it's very applicable to the other side of the table in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And I enjoyed my time GMing. For the brief span of time that I did. I unfortunately, just a lot of my players just didn't show up a lot of the time, so I just was like, this isn't worth doing, but I got a lot out of it. That's kind of the way I looked at it. It's like I got the experience. And literally the weekend after I canceled it, you invited me to Neon Inferno, so it all worked out. That's how I see it.
Because what did you decide to remind me? What you decided to run for the week or two that you were kind of like doing stuff?
So I ran Getting Paid, which was the easy mode adventure. And that was good. Thankfully, none of my players played a Netrunner because there's no Net Arch in there. But, you know, so I did that, and I kind of riffed on it a little bit. I kind of said, well, because basically, the way I did it is, it was really dumb. I'll be honest with you. I read the adventure, I understood it, and I made some notes in a text document. The thing is I wrote it from memory. So it was paraphrased, we'll call it that. That's the nice way of putting it. But it was fun. Like, I had fun running it, and I mean, some weird shit even happened in just that session. It's like, we had a rocker boy who wanted to be like a Japanese idol. So that was interesting, and I basically ad-libbed that one of the officers in Getting Paid was actually a fan.
Oh,
but
that's
they'd always
cool.
they'd always say that it was, you know, their daughter was just a really big fan, but like secretly they'd be fanboying. Because I thought that was funny.
No, that's very good. I do like that, because then, yeah, you're an NCPD officer, and all of a sudden this like rocker that you are actually a huge fan of comes around the corner, criminal activity, and you're like, shit, now I gotta deal with this somehow.
Right. And also, like, I was a new GM at that point, and these people had also never played Cyberpunk before. So I really had to just kind of make this the most, basically there had to be no dead air, right? It's like something had to be happening and they had to be doing something the whole time.
Sure.
And so one of them was a rocker boy. One of them was a med tech too. And so, you know, I there's a guy who gets taken hostage in that one. So I had the med tech basically, you know, do surgery and all that because they were hurt pretty bad. And that was it. That was fun. One of them was playing a nomad, and so I added like a break in the wall where it's like they could crush through the siding of the warehouse. You know, just like things to like kind of ad-lib it, you know. And
That's
it was
cool,
like I was
though. Like, all of that is really cool additions. I like the sound of all of that. Like, you might think it sounds stupid, but I don't think it sounds stupid at all. Like, that sounds incredibly fun.
You know, rule of cool takes precedence, man. It's like, especially
100%.
when I'm trying to like basically get people into the game, it's like, okay, I need to make this like I need to assume like there will be no session after this, which there wasn't. So it's good that I did that. But it was really fun. It was really fun. It all worked out. I learned a lot about like how cover works because of that nomad, the giving the nomad the ability to break through the walls, skill checks with the med tech. Basically, the rocker boy thing led to me learning about how like face downs and all of that work, and how roll abilities can play into social aspects. And then we also had a tech who just did a lot of skill checks and stuff. There was a security system that they turned off or whatever, and they gave me a design for the maker thing, but unfortunately the tech never got the ability to do anything. Anyways, I'm sorry, I'm rambling on about the
No,
session.
that's exactly, that's kind of what I asked about, was what'd you do? What was that like? So no, that's all very informative. I love Prepper Jack's comment here, by the way. Bruh, I'll smoke your victim. Just give me an autograph for my kiddo.
Yeah, definitely for my kiddo.
Definitely for my kid, not me. I promise.
Yeah, I'm definitely not fanboying right now like a little kid. It was so funny because there was a couple moments when I had that officer. I think I named him like Rick or something. Basically had the rocker boy at gunpoint, and it was like a very tense emotional thing for this NPC that I just conjured in my head 10 minutes ago that he's a fan.
I love that.
And he was like, I don't want to do this, man. I don't want to do this. It was like that sort of thing, but it's like it's sad and it's funny, and it's just interesting how that all kind of rolled out. And so that's kind of why, and I went into it, dude, I barely looked at the core rulebook beforehand, so I'm like if there's any new players out there that want to know like how to play the game, and you really want to know, like, you know, by next week how the game works, run a session.
Yeah, run a session. It's easier than you think, especially like easy mode is such a good, like, and you Chad, if you were listening to this, and like anyone hearing this, like, you're gonna get sick of hearing this from me because I'll keep saying it over and over and over. Easy mode is probably one of the best things the game has going for it, in the sense that, like, if you know nothing about the game, that will give you pretty much 95% of what you need to know for the game as a whole. The only real things that you miss out on with it are like character progression rules, the full role abilities for those characters that it does give you. And then, like, I guess, like, you could say, like, character progression, creation, role abilities you have to learn up a little more on, and then, like, some of the economy stuff, like the bigger, broader, big world, big picture type stuff that build your adventures out into a campaign. Like, those are the things you're missing. But, like, if you're just looking to sit down and have, like, a let's try it before we buy it session of the game and want to sit down and, like, just understand it, easy mode will get you there. Especially if you're planning on playing, easy mode will get you there. Like, you'll understand it well enough. Yeah,
I agree. As someone who's ran it, or an abridged version of it.
Right. I mean, it's not a particularly long adventure, so I think you probably caught the spirit of it, like, more than you think you did, if I had to guess. Because, like, it's exactly, I think it's like 3 or 4 total beats, basically. Because you've got, like, that hook beat where you're just kind of running to the from the docks. You've got the like, cliffhanger with the police, the development with your fixer, and then the climax where you, like, basically, yeah, like, face down against the cops one last time and then resolve it. So it's, like, really short. That there's, like, as adventures go, and for the record, that's typically how I like to run Neon Inferno, is in that same structure of, like, 4 or 5, depending on if you consider that resolution beat a full beat or not. Beat charts would consider it that, but, like, it's the 10-15 minutes you need to kind of sum it up and move out of whatever you were doing that week. So, like, I usually write Neon Inferno in that, like, 4 major beat structure each week, because I assume, at my table at least, each of these beats is going to take us an hour probably to get through, roughly, on average.
That's a fair assessment, yeah.
Yeah, like, the book is going to tell you, for all you new GMs who have the core rule book, the book will say you need 30 minutes to get through each one of them. My advice, especially if you're not experienced, I am experienced. Like, I've been doing this now in some form for Cyberpunk specifically for almost 4 years. It'll be like 4 years in July, which is wild to think about. But on average, even in all that time, beats are like an hour each for me. And, like, I can try to cut down on that a little more, but my players are also big role players. So if you also are at, like, a table where either your players are role players, or you're, like, there are people there that you or them, you don't know some of the rules, and you have to kind of suss out what are we doing with a rule or whatever, give yourself an hour per beat. And if you need to, like, look at an adventure and say, well, this is going to be more than 4 beats, start with the understanding that you might need more than a single session to resolve that gig or whatever, which is totally okay, by the way. Like, a lot of the longer ones in Tales of the Red and things like that, you will take longer. It will be more than a single one. Yeah. Prepper Jack, and maybe I'll ask your opinion on this, Nyla, because I have no idea about Pathfinder. Prepper Jack says seems to be an easier system to pick up than Pathfinder. Would you say that that's accurate?
It depends. Like, I'd ask first, like, are you very familiar with D&D 5e? If so, you'll probably pick up Pathfinder pretty quickly. It's just, instead of, like, advantage and disadvantage, it's a lot of, like, +2s sort of things. And, like, it can be really hard to pick up because of the way that you essentially gain strength as you level up, because you gain strength by feats, and there's like dozens, if not hundreds, of feats in the game, some of them which are just completely useless. And then there's like a few that are like, you need this feat. So if you don't know what those are, it can be really difficult.
Yeah. I know
So
that when I started D&D 4th Ed, that was like the big thing that made it hard for me to really fully grasp as like a player
mhm,
how I would kind of build things out was like the talents and feats kind of like aspect of that. Like all of that sort of like you have to pick, you know, this one thing. And I think by the end of 4E, it was actually insane. I think they had over 1,000 different feats that you could pick between, which
I
is
believe it.
like unbelievable how many there were. And admittedly, that's scattered across like all the source books for the system and whatnot. But it's like
Sure.
if you're playing like a condensed version, like I know they for 4th they released the Essentials line down the road that kind of condensed elements of that. Um,
Hmm.
but with that said, even then it was like it was a lot. It was a lot of stuff you kind of had to like figure out like do I really know what I'm doing or not? And yeah, like that's always the hard thing with talent-based systems, I think, is like understanding what your options are and then really having to think about how that works in favor of your character. Because there's also, again, like as someone who hasn't kind of dabbled in that kind of fantasy game in a long time,
Hmm.
I remember there being certain feats and things that like if you got them early on, they were great, and if you got them later on, they were kind of trash because you scaled past them. So
Yep.
it's like there's also time pressure on you then picking the right things at the right time, which kind of
It,
sucks in my
it
honest
it
opinion.
it becomes a thing that when you create, so this was at least the case for me when I picked up Pathfinder, is I would
Mm.
create a character and I'd literally roadmap their feat progression throughout the levels. That's like what I would do to make a character.
Mm.
And I mean, like, admittedly, I had a lot of experience with the system, so I was, you know, it's like I know if I'm playing a wizard, it's like, okay, I'm getting spell focus, and then I'm getting spell penetration, and then I'm getting this and that and the other thing, and it's like, but like, for me, that was fun. That's the thing. And it's like,
Sure.
for me, that's fun. For someone else, I could totally see it being the case that it's like, nah, this is what if I want to play a wizard that explodes cars specifically? It's like, well, you can't do that because that's not optimal, you
Right.
know? And so, like, for me, it was what I could do within that sort of optimization space and go kind of off the beaten path, while still maintaining a level of power. But for someone else, it's like, no, I just want to be able to ride mine carts that fly and shoot lasers. It's like, oh, it's hard to do that. And so anyway, um, no, yeah, I feel like Cyberpunk though, with its because the main degree of power comes from the cyberware you pick up and the way in which you utilize your roll ability.
Hmm.
And that's like, to me, it might see to me as a Pathfinder player coming in, it's like, well, where are all the feats? It's like, well, no, you have to like actually think about how you're going to use the abilities you're given. And like, what I'm discovering with Peacock is that it's when you have such a large range of creative freedom over the things you're given, there's a lot to do. And like, I guess kind of like one of the notes I had about like new player experiences was like, you know, like, and also going back to the character creation thing of me being afraid to lose humanity, try something out, you know, like all you can, there's no harm in asking a DM like, hey, can I do this thing? And they're either going to say yes or no, but they're probably going to say yes. At least that's my experience.
Right. And I also as a GM, because like I'm your one Cyberpunk Red GM at this point who kind of like
Yes.
has given you your window. So like I will say I as a GM also lean far heavier into the camp of saying yes instead of saying no when it comes to like a creative idea. Even if
Mm-hmm.
the condition becomes yes, but and then we talk about it. Because it is ultimately like you don't want to ever, I guess, as a GM, be in the camp of like totally disallowing creativity. Like, if someone
Mm-hmm.
comes to you and they're excited about it, which if a player of yours, so this is me speaking to all other GMs out there, like if you are ever in a position where you have to be on that judging side of whether or not like your player gets to do what they want to do, because they've come to you and they're like, GM, I'm so excited. I've got this great idea. This is what I want to do. I want an arm-mounted particle accelerator. This has nothing to do with anything that...
What a great idea.
What a great idea. This may or may not have something to do with a discussion that Nyla and I have talked about recently. But but with that said, like they'll come to you with this thing that they think is awesome. That is a good thing, because one, that means the player is really excited, they are engaged, and two, they aren't looking to break your game usually. Like I will argue, like, and this is based on my personal experience, but most of the time, even when I've played with people who do lean toward maybe power gaming a little bit, they are looking more to just be like, let's do something fun, right? It's not about like breaking your game in half. That's not the implicit goal of that. Like the side effect might be that it does, unless you're like mindful of it, but like the goal is never, I think, to break the game and ruin other people's fun, right? And so I think that our job as a GM is to like say yes, but add caveat if you think that whatever the idea that the player suggested is too far outside the bounds of what is like balanced and interesting and would like ruin some of those other aspects of the game that are interesting for not having certain capabilities, not having certain aspects available to you, those sorts of things. So yeah. That is ultimately what I feel like when I look at things like a player coming up and saying like, oh, I want to do this thing. What do I have to do to make it happen, or can I do it? The can is always yes. How we do it is the question. And that's the discussion where we really should be talking, I feel.
And I think that's sort of, okay, and I'm biased here, but I think that sort of ambitious creativity is healthy. But I mean, I think as a player, right? I need to understand, it is my responsibility to understand that there are limits to what I can do. And it's not that the GM doesn't want me to do it. It's that I can't summon a unicorn and it wins all my battles for me. It's right. Like that's like I need to be realistic about my expectations. And so part of that, I feel like, at least for me, when I'm role playing, right, and I'm playing a tabletop game, the DM is working with me. The story might be working against me, but the DM is working with me, which is a weird thing to say, but they're two separate entities in my head. And I think the DM really wants me to win, deep down.
I'd say if you've got a good GM, that is absolutely what it should be. I agree with that.
And that's why so like for me, I and Em, you might be able to attest to this, I'm a very dangerously confident person in the way that I come into Cyberpunk. And that is because if I wasn't, I would be really boring to have as a player, I feel. Right? I mean, let me ask you this. It's like, when I say, like we just ended a session, when we ended the session with the Biotechnica Black facility, and I narrowly escaped with my life from the Kraken. I could, and the reasonable thing of me to say was, oh my god, Em, that was so awful, please, have mercy next time, whatever. But it's like, no, that's boring. I don't want you to have mercy on me. I want to have fun.
Right.
And so I'm going to be like, no, fuck me up. Or, sorry, can I swear?
Yeah. I've got, trust me, I've got content warnings on the stream. You're fine. You're absolutely fine. We're also like 40 minutes deep now, so like if there's, no, you're chill.
Yeah. No, I'm like, don't show me mercy. Fuck me up. Like, I want to feel something when I go into these sessions. It's like, that's why I play them. I want to be challenged.
Yeah, and I think that that's a healthy way to look at it too. Like, just to add my commentary on that.
And it's like, if I can't overcome that, okay, well, I have the knowledge to, in the future, tackle that.
Right.
It's like with those notes I made at the beginning of the session with mistakes in which I made my character. It's like, well, now I know if I don't want that to happen, if I play another Netrunner, I should take a chipware socket and I should get a paint editor. Yeah. It's like, I know that now.
Well, and now that you know it even in the context of like Neon Inferno, like that's something that Peacock could be like eyeing, the horizon for, and be like, all right, these are the things that, now that I understand what maybe I missed at character creation, because the other thing too is a paint editor is incredibly expensive at character creation. Like, getting one of those is borderline, like, it's borderline impossible, I think, with a starter budget, especially for a Netrunner. But now that you know it's there, and you're like, oh, that'll solve half my problems, because now I don't need to worry about having a medtech with stims, which is the kind of pharmaceutical equivalent, or black lace, which you could self-administer as a street drug that has an addictive potential. You could now get, paint editor. Sure, you burn your humanity a little bit, but I mean, you can therapize that back. Like, you're fine mostly. Right. Like, mostly you're okay.
And that's up to me if I feel that is a worthy sacrifice. Right. Exactly.
Or which route maybe feels better to you too, because like there's every possibility that you're like, I mean, paint editor would solve the problem for good with like at a relatively low cost too. Like, just cost me some humanity, but like it's 1,500 eddies, I think, for a chipware socket in the paint editor, whereas black lace is 50 eddies a dose. Right. So I'll take the chance I get addicted, and in exchange for a guarantee of like never dealing with pain ever again.
Yeah. Someone in the chat said something, and I kind of want to comment on it.
I bet I know what it is, because I agree. I want to as well.
And NPCs ultimately exist to lose.
Wrong.
I want to ask you to elaborate on that, because I have an answer.
Yeah, so there are, I would argue that there are 3 classifications of NPC. You've got the mooks, or the minions, whatever term you want to use, they're interchangeable to me, which are those are the NPCs that are designed to fold as a consequence of your players challenging them, right? They're the underlings of the bigger bads that you have in your setting. Then beyond that, you've got the mini bosses. Mini bosses are designed to be a persistent challenge, and maybe eventually they are built to lose in a way, or that is the expectation, but they shouldn't be a one and done. They come in, they're challenged, they fold like a lawn chair, and that's the end of them. They are supposed to be there for multiple sessions, right? And presenting that present challenge each time. And then beyond that, there are the bosses. Now, bosses aren't all unfriendly, mind you, right? But these are going to be your major recurring characters, like in Neon Inferno Season 2, it's Paradox, or Rex Royale, or, Shinobu. Like, these are the people, they have names, they have motivations, they have, like, all this complexity to them. Sometimes they will lose. Other times, they will win, and that is to your player's benefit or detriment. But I will say that NPCs aren't always built to lose. Like, those NPCs, sometimes even in opposition to your players, they are meant to win. And it's how your players deal with that fact that makes the story interesting. There's no supposition, I guess you could say, of players having plot armor. That should never be the case, in my opinion.
Right. I mean, I was thinking along the same lines. To me, how do I put this? This is gonna get, like, the way I'm thinking about it is very philosophical, so I apologize in advance.
Be philosophical. I'm here for it.
There is, in my eyes, the beautiful thing about role playing, and because ultimately it's like a microcosm of like life, right? There is no such thing as good or bad inherently. Everyone has motivations and everyone has something that they need or want, or they, to live. And so in my eyes, I mean, I agree with you. I think that if the thing that determines an NPC's fate is the players. That's what to me a tabletop RPG is all about. It's like the party is the one that end of the day decides what happens. It's like, so like in my notes when I was literally writing up this document for the podcast, I said the campaign is where you, the player, are an active participant in the center stage of the production that is the campaign. And so to like kind of take that opportunity and go do something that is going to impact the world around you with your party, And I think that's kind of what makes tabletop RPGs like, fun to play, is that you play an active role in how the world is shaped. And so whether an NPC loses or wins, I mean, what does winning or losing really mean?
Fair point. I mean, and to, I guess, come back a little from the philosophy of it, and just to bring it to like a storytelling level, right? Yeah. Like Cyberpunk and like fantasy systems like Pathfinder are trying to do two very different things. And this is why I felt like I needed to make a video a week ago talking about like Brennan Lee Mulligan's take on like narrative systems versus non-narrative systems, and like when we focus on combat systems, or combat heavy systems, I should say, versus those that have more narrative like gameplay elements, like what do each of those systems try to achieve? And I think that Cyberpunk has a fairly robust combat system. It has some very detailed. 2020 was even more so this way, right? It was very simulative in its combat. And it also, though, by contrast, and I think Red does a really good job of simplifying those parts of combat that were too much early on in the game's existence in 2020. It reduces it down to something that's easier to understand, grasp, and like work with as a new GM. And it balances against it quite nicely now a fairly weighty social system and like social interaction with certain roles like the rocker boy or the media or what was the other one I was thinking of that are socializers? Fixers, I believe, was the one I was thinking of, because they're the other ones that have like a contact book. Those roles are very much like robust socializers. And I think that in order for Cyberpunk to work, you have to give not a heavy allowance, but a realistic allowance that the players could fail on some level. And many fantasy systems that are, they don't care about narrative in their rules, at least. I think that those systems are set up for the players to win. And in systems like that, NPCs are very much designed for the players to win over them most of the time, or they're balanced around that being the possibility more often than not. Whereas in Cyberpunk, they design it so that there is a chance the players fail, because in that failure, we find an interesting divide from like the player's will versus the will of the world and the will of the city, which is its own character. To kind of go back to what you brought up, like the GM's rooting for you, the city doesn't give a shit about you. And those are two distinct entities at the end of the day. Because while the GM may channel the city, it's not the game design and the way dice work are really what the will of the city is. And that is designed to just be impartial to the players in a lot of cases. And if they get too big for themselves, it might actively oppose them. And the GM is there to just be the channeler of that will of the city, the will of the enemy NPC. But ultimately, they want the players to win. They are not leaving the players out to dry, I think, most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think nothing exemplifies that more than the reputation stat. There is nothing else, because that is essentially, it is a counter to me. The reputation stat is a representation of how much you at this point have conquered over the city.
Right.
It is like, this is, you earned this. You are now no longer just nobody. You are now somebody, you know? And, you know, you play smart, you work hard, you know, you fucking push back against the city and you survive, you're gonna get a reputation. And that, like, to me is like, the end game of Cyberpunk is like, not an FPC. It is not, you know, rank 8 of whatever your role ability is. It is, what is your reputation? If your reputation is above like a 5, it's like, you won. Like, in my books, like, I don't care if you die the next day. Like, you won. You're somebody. You died as somebody. You know?
That's an interesting perspective. I like the way you think. That is one end game. I think that Cyberpunk in particular has the advantage of having many end games, because reputation is a double-edged sword in reality.
I want to make it clear. It is like, subjectively to me, the end game. It's like, subjectively to me, the end game is becoming somebody.
Right. No, you know? and to Yosemite Mike, because he says he keeps getting cut up audio, and I don't know why that is, given that I'm not seeing any drop frames or whatever. But this will go up on YouTube as well. So like, if you disagree with what I'm saying or what Nyla's saying, Mike, like, by all means, you know, like, give us that comment when maybe you can hear the whole of it. Because the summary basically is that there are many kinds of NPCs, even antagonistic. Maybe refresh, but like, the summary is basically NPCs they come in many shapes and sizes. And I think the biggest antagonistic NPCs, they're there to drive the plot forward and oppose the players. I don't think they're always meant to fall. There are some antagonists that are just too big for the players to handle in a game like Cyberpunk. We talk about a game like D&D where the players are fated to become some degree of demigod if the game goes on long enough. Then, like, sure, they can overcome most anything if they have a will strong enough to oppose it. But like, that is a different system, a different story, and it's a different way of looking at things, I think, when you break it into that kind of into those pieces, right? But yeah, like, to speak to end games, I think, and knowing that we're getting close to kind of the end of the half here, I think there are like 3 end games that you can kind of look at Cyberpunk through, right? Because I think if you're playing a character who cares a lot about their reputation, them becoming somebody is the end game. Like, the moment they enter that and they start swimming with the big fish and all that entails, that is their end game. And that is that, you know, do or die moment of like, we finally hit to look at 77, we finally hit the big leagues, right? We're here. We've arrived at the big leagues, and that is my end game, right? I do this, you know, I play the jobs, play the shows, do the things that a big fish does in this pond, right? And that is where I make my home. And then you have to kind of define like, well, what does that look like when you're asked to defend your title, right? And that becomes your end game. Where
oh, sorry.
Ahead. No, go ahead.
I was about to say to kind of comment on that and also kind of tie it to 2077. It's like with my definition of an end game, right? Like the way I see it with my logic, Jackie lost, right, in 77. You know, but by also that same logic, Johnny won, and that is most definitely not the case, right? Like.
Yep.
So, I mean, kind of tying it back to what this whole discussion was about, new player mistakes and experiences, I am anticipating that that is a mistake on my front, and I really want to be proven wrong because I want to find new end games, if that makes sense.
Right, because I would argue my counterpoint to that is other end games that you could consider. For some people, it is getting the role rank up as high as possible. Like, and I would argue that for netrunners in particular, your end game starts opening up around rank 7 or 8 when you are like becoming someone who becomes a god in the machine. You know, like it is insane when you get that high level of netrunner experience where you're like, suddenly we're cracking through systems that we just shouldn't be able to. We are destroying things that really no sane person should be going up against, and we're winning, right? That to me is where it's like a big element of a netrunner's end game. But there are other roles that, like, especially the non-social roles, where like as a med tech, for example, I could chill at rank 4 or 5 on my med tech forever and be like, this is fine, you know, like I've got the tools I want. I've got some speed heal, I've got some surgery skill, you know, I've got the capabilities to do the things that I want to do, and I'm happy there. I'm chilling there, and I'm good. So realistically, then what my med tech, like, so my personal med tech, what I'm going for, my end game, is actually my life path. My family are wrongly imprisoned, and I want them out. Whatever I have to do, whoever I have to kill, or whatever things I have to make happen to bring them back into society with me, those are the things that I ultimately will be doing. And that is, I think, more than anything, what defines an end game more is the character. It's like, where do you want to go? And in another world, one of the characters in one of Diamond's games, and I think you know Bishi Bunny. In
another name.
Yeah. So they are playing a tech who has a debilitating illness, and they want to go FBC to surpass their illness. And so for them, the end game is making an FBC and getting into that part of the game. And then whatever happens after that is a bit of a mystery, right? But I think it's a great concept because it has really defined aspects of like, this is where I start, and here's where my character meets a degree of like completedness, right? Yeah. Which is, I think that's really in Cyberpunk what defines an end game, is like what completes your character and their motivations. And there's always going to be some like counter push on one level or another to your character progressing up to that level, right? And I think that a lot of new players, when you look at Cyberpunk on the outside in, you're looking at, oh man, well, what are the exotic weapons that cost the most? What are the cyberware pieces that provide me the most power? And they're going to immediately assume like FBCs or something like the Malorian 3516 or, you know, some of those other ridiculously powerful, or maybe it's just a really nice car or something. Like, that is my end game. These are the things I want to go for because those are the quote unquote magic items of the setting. And I think that there is a degree of truth to that, but I would argue that more often than not, that ends up not being what the true end game is to obtain those things. Because stuff can be taken from you, and they don't really do anything if your character gets to a certain point of like being unable to defend those things or protect them, you know?
Yeah, I don't want to drag this on for too long, just because I know we are at the halfway mark, but I feel like an important point to make is an end game is not static. You do not have to know what your end game is at character creation. So that's something I would steer away from, especially if you're a newer player, is kind of just coast with your character, explore them as people. If you were to describe them as like a person in your day-to-day life, and like really like think about like, what does this person want?
Right.
You know, because you might not know, right? But that's okay to not know. What if something in the story happens and that becomes your end game? You know, it's just, you don't have to know as a newer player like what you want to do. You know, maybe you're just there to have fun at the start, and then you start to get invested, and that's when it gets dangerous. You start to get invested in this world, and you start to get invested in these characters. You've met Generation Red, and you love them, and you want nothing bad to happen to them. And then, you know, maybe something happens, and they're friends. It's like, well, I guess I found my end game.
Right. Know? Well, and that's like, and to speak back against that just briefly, I know that's kind of like Cody's character. I think he started as very like, yeah, I'm just here, I'm a guard for the settlement, right? And then like over time, yeah, just watching his character grow, like to defend Generation Red, and like that's become his purpose. And it's like really cool to see that, right? Like in that, I will say the end games you find are the best end games, because they are like, they're not so cleanly defined by like a metric or by a number. They are defined by, did I actually get this done? It's defined by an accomplishment or an achievement. And that's the best.
And Peacock is out right now. He started out and he was like, I want to be the change I see in the world. So I'm going to be the best netrunner out there, and then I can do something about it. But something's going to happen. There's going to be some, you know, there's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. I can feel it.
Oh, the shoe drops. Yeah.
The shoe drops, and, you know, it could be a 180, could be a 90 degrees. We don't know. That's kind of what I'm excited about as a player, is to see where this goes, because now this is out of my control. And that makes me uncomfortable.
That's beautiful in my opinion.
But remember, it's like, I gotta get comfortable being uncomfortable, you know? And it's exciting too. It's like, you know, it's not like a bad thing, you know? It's like, whatever happens at the end of the day, and getting and understanding that and coming to terms with that could be an end game of itself. But that's you know, a weird concept.
Right. Agreed. All right. Well, I think that's a good kind of note to leave this half on. So for those of you who are watching this later on YouTube, we are going to go over to Diamond's channel, even if she's not on the podcast this week. We want to keep our structure with these regular episodes. So the interviews are going to kind of alternate, but like here we want to keep it, condensed onto one, my channel, then hers, or vice versa. So if you're watching on YouTube, this is the part where we go over to Diamond's channel to see the second half of things. We also do have this in a playlist. So if you want to look at the playlist, it'll automatically alternate the episode, part 1 to part 2. But that said, we are now going to go over there. So go ahead and swap over now.